My name is Chat Gamba, and tonight I have the opportunity of introducing our keynote speaker for the night. Before I do that, though, if you need to stand and stretch a little bit, you can do that, because once the keynote speaker comes up, she's going to have us glued to our seats, because it's going to be great. All right, no takers. Good. Awesome. All right, so our keynote speaker for tonight is Jruby. Jruby was the director of the Sandia National Laboratories from July 2015 through April 2017. This is a company that has over 12,000 employees and over a $3 billion budget. So it's a big deal. She was also the first woman to lead a national security laboratory. She worked for Sandia for 34 years, first as its California site beginning in 1983, and then she moved to the New Mexico site in 2010 as the vice president, overseeing more than 1,300 personnel and managing work in such areas as counterterrorism, homeland security, energy security, and nuclear, biological, and chemical security. When Hruby joined Sandia in 1983, she did research in thermal and fluid sciences, solar energy, and nuclear weapon components. During her career, she has been engaged in nanoscience research, hydrogen storage, mechanical component design, thermal analysis, and microfluidics. I know, major stuff here. So yeah, at this point, you know that we have a very, very well-accomplished woman in our midst. Last year, the Society of Women Engineers presented her with the Suzanne Genesis Upward Mobility Award, which celebrates an individual's success in a significant management role and contribution to decision-making within their organization. In 2017, Sandia established a new fellowship program named after Hruby, in hopes of attracting and recruiting talented women in engineering and science fields who are interested in becoming technical leaders in national security. The Jruby Fellowship Program will immerse postdoctoral candidates in a 3-year technical leadership development program, including mentoring by executives and exposure to national security policy. So please, it is our honor and privilege to welcome to the stage our distinguished keynote speaker, Jruby.
I have to wait for the slide presentation here. Well, good evening. It's great to be here, and I'm very impressed by what the SWE organization has done here, and thank you to them and to all the industrial participants here tonight. I honestly expected a smaller crowd. Tonight, I'm just going to go ahead and move forward here. I want to do a couple of things. I want to introduce you to an engineering career at a national laboratory. The Department of Energy runs the national laboratories for the most part in the United States. So I'll describe those a little bit. And then I'll introduce you to Sandia Labs and what we did at Sandia Labs, which is where I spent the bulk of my career. And I'm going to do this by talking through my career. So as opposed to just sort of abstract, I'll tell you what I did, and I'll give you a pretty good idea of the laboratory after introducing a little bit about the lab. And then I want to talk to you about my insights about the culture of national laboratories, because I think as you're looking for careers, that's very important. And finally, and most importantly, I want to implore you to think about how you want to make a difference as you think about what career you want to take on. There's a lot of years in front of you. And you should, when you look back on those years, you should feel good about them. And in order to do that, you have to think about it now. So let me just introduce the Department of Energy Labs quickly to you. The Department of Energy manages 17 national laboratories. They're all research and development laboratories, and each of them have a slightly different mission focus. Inside the laboratories, we understand all the intricacies of those differences. From outside the laboratories, it's a little bit hard to see them. But what is interesting about the labs is some are more science-focused and some are more engineering-focused or technology-focused. Some of them are small, single mission laboratories, and some of them are very large, multiple mission laboratories. Sandia happens to be a large multiple mission laboratory, so it's easy to talk about the sort of a broad scope of things that that you do. Sort of these laboratories, the people who work at the laboratories are not government employees, but the work that's done at the laboratory is largely for the government. So they're sort of a unique beast in our system here in the U.S. They're called federally funded research and development centers. And while that model is not perfect, it is, and I can tell you from a lot of personal experience, the envy of the world in terms of how government R&D can be done. So if you don't know about the Department of Energy laboratories, you get a little peek tonight, and if it's interesting to you, you should find out more. The labs are geographically dispersed around the United States. And even though they're in states and cities all over the place, and even sometimes named after the city or state that they're in, they all have national purposes. They're not state labs, they're not local labs, they're national laboratories with national purpose, but you can live in many different places if you work at one of these laboratories. So I brought a little video that the Department of Energy does. We'll see if it works here.
Energy. It impacts all of us. It always has, and it always will. That's why the U.S. Department of Energy exists, to bring energy and science to the people.
Scientists like her go to work to build the clean energy economy. He studies the tiniest particles in our universe. And these scientists get up every morning to make sure our nuclear stockpile is safe and reliable. Meet the solutions people. These are scientists, engineers, and public servants, people who endure sleepless nights, failed attempts, and countless setbacks to reach a breakthrough.
And they're all part of the nation's premier science and technology agency, the U.S. Department of Energy, home to unparalleled laboratories and unique expertise that have led the world since the dawn of the atomic age. They're the ones taking on the toughest science, energy, and national security problems on the planet. These are problems that are too big or too risky for one person or one company to solve alone. The solutions call for the best minds and the greatest resources.
Solutions like making clean energy available to everyone,
boosting energy efficiency in our homes and buildings,
advancing the cars and trucks of tomorrow,
defending the electric grid through cybersecurity,
powering deep space missions with isotope fuel,
accelerating the speed of supercomputing,
inventing new materials and changing how we make everything. They're protecting America with a safe and reliable nuclear deterrent, cleaning up nuclear waste from the Cold War, even propelling the Navy with nuclear power.
The U.S. Department of Energy is one of the biggest sponsors of research and development in the world, and it opens its doors to over 32,000 non-government researchers each year.
That's how the impossible becomes possible. And that's why this science impacts all people.
From consumers and homeowners, to our teachers and students, industry leaders and members of Congress, from northern Alaska down to Puerto Rico, every American has a stake in this science.
Building the clean energy economy, studying our universe, keeping our nation safe. The challenges that face us now in energy, science, and nuclear security won't wait.
Neither will the United States Department of Energy.
It's science
for the people.
So hopefully that gives you a pretty good idea of the sorts of things that the U.S. government funds that are bigger than any one company, bigger than any one laboratory. But in fact, the U.S. government funds a lot of really amazing research at these laboratories. So now let me just talk to you a little bit about Sandia, and then I'll jump into my career at Sandia. So Sandia is one of the national security laboratories in the Department of Energy. It's a well-kept secret in the United States that the Department of Energy actually designs our nation's nuclear weapons, and they have since the Cold War. So the United States made a very interesting decision at the end of the war. They decided that they didn't want nuclear weapons to be made by the Department of Defense. That is, they didn't want nuclear weapons to be made by war fighters. They wanted nuclear weapons to be made by a civilian population of people who would care about the safety and security and reliability of the weapons, and honestly hope that they never get used, as opposed to people who fight the war. And so it's a very interesting sort of system we have in the United States, and that is Sandia's beginning. Today, Sandia, because it's full of engineers, does many different things besides nuclear weapons. Energy was sort of the first foray, but now it does a variety of other things, really tough problems for our country. And in fact, I spent a lot of my career in nuclear nonproliferation, and I like to say that if you know about nuclear weapons, you have a responsibility to be involved in nuclear nonproliferation. So Sandia has a workforce of about 12,000 people and a budget of over $3 billion annually. The workforce is made up of advanced degree engineers, largely, people with masters and PhDs. The mission of the labs is rooted in the Manhattan Project, as I said, but today about half the work is for other things. The diverse missions of Sandia makes it a very vibrant place and a very fun place to work because you get to move in and out of programs that the U.S. government has decided are important enough to fund a bunch of scientists and engineers to do at a governmental level. So I also have a short video on Sandia. So one of the greatest things about working in a government laboratory is the government builds for our laboratories or funds for our laboratories amazing test facilities. And so things like making things go really fast and run into other things. And it's wonderful engineering, and it's fun every day. You know, every day there's not a gigantic experiment, but a lot of days lead up to that. And I worked in solar energy for a while, and I had a friend who was developing a safety system that had to be tested on the sled track that was a mile long. So the rocket engines propel this thing into a wall you saw to test the safety. It turned out to be a nuclear engineering fuel package. And so he would always tell me when they were going to do the sled track, and I climbed to the top of the solar tower and watched the sled track like once a week. And those are the sorts of things that are, I mean, it's great engineering. So let me just now turn to a very, very quick sort of summary of my career that I think will give you a sense of what's it like to work every day for 34 years at a single place that has a government mission. And I'm going to take you through career phases that I totally created, after looking back on it. So these were not phases that I set out to do. This is just the way I'm going to describe my career. The first is technical contributions and technical credibility. The second is confidence, partnerships, and customers. Third is leadership. Fourth is responsibility, and the fifth is giving back. So I'm sure actually for all the mature industrial people here, this is not that different than how they might describe their career as well. Oh, let me actually just talk about the pictures a little bit. So I did, especially as a leader, get to know Washington, D.C. very, very well. So I never talk about my career without some cherry blossoms in a picture. And I really had the opportunity to go to amazing places and do amazing things. So the Licktock Point picture is with one of my colleagues. That's actually in the North Slope of Alaska. And we did weather monitoring. We had weather monitoring stations there. This picture in the bottom left is in Vienna at the International Atomic Energy Association. I also spent a lot of time in Vienna at the IAEA. And that's a picture in China where we did collaborative work in nuclear security. All right, stage one. Technical contributions and credibility. This is a hugely important stage of engineers' careers. That you come out of school and you're sort of well studied, but you do have to learn how to contribute in big team environments or small team environments or individually, depending on your assignments, and do whatever it takes for technical credibility in the organization you're in. In Sandia, that technical credibility often comes through external publications, conference talks, things like that. And in this phase of my career, it happened to be during the Carter administration, and President Carter was very interested in solar energy, although we still had a lot of nuclear weapons at the time. So my career was spent mostly in solar energy and a little bit in nuclear weapons doing thermal analysis. And I put up this picture of this finite element code because that was the state of thermal analysis when I worked in that area in the early 1980s. I also worked on this technology called falling particle receiver. But just to tell you how careers come full circle, the falling particle receiver received an R&D 100 award last year. I don't know, maybe it was 2016. So, solar energy goes in and out of style in the US government, so I worked on it. It was sort of quiescent for a while. It's come back, and it's now building a full-scale pilot plant. So it's actually really rewarding to see. And also why I was working on making technical contributions at full time. Ronald Reagan became the president, and as you may all know, he was pushing what we called Star Wars, or the Strategic Defense Initiative at the time. And to do that, he had an interesting approach. His approach was, let's build up a really scary nuclear weapons capability and then see if we can negotiate with the Russians so that we don't have as many. And so it was an interesting time to work. And I started working then in the Bush and Clinton administrations, the first Bush administration, on tech transfer and economic competitiveness, because during this period of time, Japan and others were starting to really come on strong in manufacturing, and it was really hurting the U.S. economy. The point of all of this is not only did I get to work on a lot of great technical things as a result, but that, you know, that when you work for a national laboratory, the national priorities change. And it provides a lot of opportunities. Sometimes you're disappointed that they change because you really like what you're working on. But the truth is that, you know, renewable energies, nuclear weapons, tech transfer, the Strategic Defense Initiative, I worked on all those things, and I worked on all those things because Congress gave us the money to work on all those things, because that was what was important to the United States at the time. And during this period of time, I also became what we call the supervisor or first level manager at the laboratory. And I decided to do that after about 6 years or so, making technical contributions. I often wished I had actually stayed making direct technical contributions for longer, but as it turns out, it's kind of worked out. So going into management early has the benefit of still having lots of energy even when you're pretty far up in management. I'd also had 2 kids by that time in my Sandia career. I'll come back to talk about that kind of stuff later. So let me just talk about what I call phase 2, which was really developing confidence, developing partnerships, and working directly with customers. So often when you're doing technical contributions, you're working with your team, but not necessarily relaying that work to the boss or the customers in our case. So during this phase of my career, I had a lot of opportunity to work directly with customers, which oddly enough came largely from 9/11. During the George W. Bush administration, that after terrorist attack, you won't be surprised, I hope at this point, to learn that there was this huge swing at the laboratories, at the government-funded laboratories, to work on countering terrorism, which all of a sudden seemed like a major threat, which hadn't seemed so big before. And so there were some of us that were asked to jump in and support that program right now, and I was able to do that, and that actually was a fun experience as well. So other things I did with other parts of the government, just to give you an idea that even though we're Department of Energy Laboratory, we work with a lot of people. This picture in the middle at the bottom is me and some of our Sandia technical staff with Rose Gottemuller. Rose was the Undersecretary of Arms Control and Nonproliferation at the Department of State. She actually is now at NATO, but she has personally negotiated most of the arms control agreements we have with Russia, and she would come out to the laboratory to learn about technologies and do things, and in fact, at this point, is quite a good friend of mine. During the Obama administration, I had an opportunity with our local delegation of elected officials. These are some of the senators and congressmen from the state of New Mexico, and Sally Jewell, who was the Interior Secretary at the time. And Sally came out to visit the laboratory. Now, for those of you who don't know Sally Jewell, she was sort of an idol of mine because she actually was the CEO of REI. Before she became the Interior Secretary, and an engineer. And so when when she decided to come to the laboratory, I actually was flying back from China the night before, but I said, I'm going to be here for Sally Jewell because I wanted so much to get to know her. And we took her out to the solar facility. In our solar facility, we have this tall tower. It's about 30 stories high. And she's a real outdoors person. Now, Albuquerque is at like 6,000 feet, so a lot of people get very winded walking up a floor of, in a building. And Sally Jewell, we said, well, you want to go on top of the tower? She goes, I want to, let's go. And she's just started running up the stairs of the tower, and I'm like, no, it's really high here. You're gonna get, like, let's take the elevator. No, I want. And so every single person in the delegation walked up the tower because Sally Jewell walked up the tower. Some of them didn't do as well as she did, but. And then the picture of the lower right is actually a trip that my colleagues and I from the other national security laboratories took to Russia to visit their similar laboratories. Now, we've done this from time to time and had been on a hiatus for a while. But we invited the Russians back. We did it every year. They usually said no, and finally they said yes. And they came to our labs, and then they invited us to their labs. And I tell you, it was quite an experience going to the Russian nuclear weapons laboratories and interacting with them. That is something I didn't think I would do in the course of my career. So the next phase I call leadership. When you're a leader at any institution, or certainly at Sandia, well, you have the opportunity to be the spokesperson for that organization. Often it's like a figurehead position. And in that position, I had some amazing opportunities, and it also gives you an idea of the things the labs are involved in. So one was I had the opportunity to tour Secretary of Defense Ash Carter around the laboratory. Now, what makes the, Secretary of Defense is a pretty high-level position, but what makes it so cool is Secretary Carter has a PhD in physics, and he also has a PhD in history. He's an amazing person, and it was really fun to show him around the laboratory and have him talk directly to our physicists and try to ask them questions. He really tried to ask them questions they couldn't answer. It was a lot of fun. I also traveled quite a bit with Secretary Moniz. This is a trip in the left that I took to China with Secretary Moniz. The Chinese and the U.S. are working hard together on securing nuclear fuel from commercial power plants, because China has such a problem with their, the pollution. They're trying to get rid of the coal plants, and they're building over 20 nuclear power plants. And of course, in the U.S., we're very concerned that they have a complete security on all their nuclear fuel. So we have joint programs with them on that, and this was actually kicking off, this trip was actually kicking off their Center of Excellence in Nuclear Security. Other pictures doing other fun things. I love being underground. This is a picture being underground at a salt repository that we have. I also got involved in talking about just how federally funded research and development centers operate and how they should evolve with the times. And finally, I was named the lab director, which is a pretty big deal from the perspective of this is really not a diverse group of people, the national lab directors, and actually it was very warmly received. And finally, responsibility. So these things all sound fun, and they were, but I worked really hard, and it's hard to understand what 12,000 people do, and it's hard to represent them, and you have some pretty significant responsibilities. One of those responsibilities is the director of a national security laboratory, and there's 3 of us, along with the commander of Strategic Command in the U.S. Department of Defense. has a legal responsibility to write a letter to the president every year, certifying the safety, security, and reliability of the U.S. nuclear weapons stockpile. That letter, just to give you a sense of how that works, it's really a sort of a report more than a letter. But I took 100 hours of briefings to write my letter. I wrote my letter, right? I mean, it wasn't written by other people, but 100 hours of briefings from our technical staff. And that was what they narrowed down for me to hear, right? It's a big responsibility, as it should be. I also participated in many leadership panels, particularly women's leadership panels, but not exclusively women's leadership panels. But I never had the time to do that, never. But I did it because out of a sense of responsibility to talk to other people about what my career was and help them in any way they could. I worked with Congress a lot, and this is a picture of, whoops, sorry. There's this back channel thing here. There's this picture of me with Senator Heinrich, who's a senator from the state of New Mexico who's an engineer, a terrific senator as well, in my opinion. But and in 2017, there's some magazine that names the most powerful women's engineers during Engineer Week, and I was we had a lot of fun with. I had no idea this was coming. It just showed up on my desk one day. You know, this open. You were named the second most powerful female engineer. And my first response was, what part of nuclear weapons don't they understand? Should have been the first. And then finally, giving back. So, you know, during a course of career should be more than about you as things go on, and there's a lot of opportunities that all of you will have. And in fact, everybody who's here recruiting for their company at this fair is giving back. They didn't have to do that on a Friday, you know, evening. They decided they wanted to because they believe in the work that they're doing, and they want to recruit you to do it as well. And so some of the greatest opportunities I had to give back, I was involved in working on many panels for the Department of Defense. And when I became the laboratory director, I sort of resigned from those panels, just didn't have time. And they gave me a public service medal. So this is General Paul Selva, who's the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, giving that medal to me. I was telling, somebody asked me what was the largest audience. Chad asked me the largest audience I have spoken. I gave the undergraduate engineering commencement at the University of California, Berkeley. So it was 4,000 engineering students and their parents and friends, and so it was a great. And again, did I have the time to do that? Absolutely not. But it was really fun. This is the Suzanne Genesis Award. I worked a lot with, we had a lot of programs for students, usually on Saturdays and Sundays, and I would really try to go to those to the extent that I can because I enjoyed it very much, but it was, again, very important to be a role model. Okay. So just sort of summing this up, I went to work at Sandia to make a difference. I felt that it was a place that made a difference, and I think I did that through in several different ways. One is maturing technologies to make the world a better place. I talked about the solar central receivers, and I also worked a lot on radiation, chemical, and biological sensors to protect cities and events in the U.S. I also did my fair share of work to ensure the safe, secure, and reliable nuclear weapons. We talked some about that. And certainly, and I still do, a lot of work to advance cooperative international science and technology. So now I just want to talk a little bit how I think it is to work at Sandia and the national laboratories. So the work is largely complex science and engineering, big problems. We do team science. The primary sponsor is the US government. The priorities change. And the metric is great science in the public interest. You even saw the video that the Department of Energy produced about themselves. They want to do science for the people. The culture of the laboratories, Sandia and other laboratories, they're nonprofit institutions. They're well established with a proud legacy, that sort of code for saying you really have to understand what they've done over time. Because if you just come in without understanding that, everybody will, the people work there for their careers, so they're very proud of what they've done over time. Science and engineering at the laboratories is the highest calling. I'm a mechanical engineer. Everybody who is manages technical work at the laboratory is a scientist or engineer. We do have business staff, but the business people don't run the laboratories. The scientists and engineers run the laboratory, so therefore it's always considered the highest calling. It's a competitive environment. Good students with advanced degrees and a strong expectation of surviving peer review. And integrity and individual excellence are the priorities of the laboratory. The lifestyle is good pay and reasonable hours. I mean, you do have projects where you work a long time. You don't have a chance for profit sharing since it's a nonprofit institutions, but it's reasonable pay and good work-life balance. There's many nice locations to live in. Some are urban, some are rural, so it depends on what you're looking for. It's a casual environment. It looks like people dress like they dress at a university. Actually, maybe not as good sometimes. It is a mix of university and corporate feel, but they are fairly large and established bureaucracies. They've been around for 60, 70 years, but the management structure is very flat. And there is a strong, strong sense of belonging at the laboratories. There's great respect for past accomplishments. Inclusivity is valued by many, but not always practiced. It's still a journey, I think, inclusivity and microclimates, and we can talk more about that if you want. But there is a strong feeling of patriotism and loyalty at the laboratory. This motto that Sandia has from President Truman's letter, exceptional service in the national interest, people take that really seriously, all of those words. Exceptional service, national interest. So since this is a SWE-sponsored event, and because I almost always include something like this in my talks, let me just talk about my experiences as a woman in engineering at a national laboratory. I think it was extremely important to build technical credibility, and it's a long and continuous process. So I certainly tried to build technical credibility as early as I could when I was directly contributing as a technical contributor, but I needed to build it and did, and through my entire career. So when people come to brief you as a manager, they expect you to ask good questions. When you're in the workplace, you should expect your management to ask you tough questions. And if they don't, well, they're kind of falling down on the job too, right? So it's a continuous process to be on top of things. I think as a woman, my interpersonal skills needed to be better than my male colleagues. And the reason why is, well, there are a lot of awkward moments. Especially as I began my engineering career, there weren't that many women, and people didn't necessarily know what to say or how to treat you. And sometimes it was kind of awkward, and you had to sort of have nice interpersonal skills to deal with that, to say the right thing at the right time, to make it not feel so bad and to get through the awkward moment. And because it was expected. And I put an exclamation point because I cannot tell you how many performance reviews I had that say, oh, and she's really good with people. like it was just an expectation. Oh, and I think it's part of what we carry as we change the culture in engineering. And I was encouraged to go into management really early, and there are actually a lot of women who complain about this, that people who are good with people are encouraged to go into management as opposed to having a long technical career of their own, and it's a real dilemma for a lot of women. It wasn't for me. I liked management, but it was part of my experiences. It was sometimes hard to be heard in meetings. There is a tendency, it's real, to talk over women or to not quite notice what they said. And I found, for me, it helped to be very generous, maybe a little too generous at times, and a little loud. I actually have a story from, I worked one summer as a summer intern in a town that I wasn't familiar with. And I decided, I was kind of bored and I wanted to be outside more. And for some strange reason, which today I still don't understand, I decided to umpire slow-pitch men's softball. There was a park next to where I was living, and one of the things I learned is that you had to be really loud, especially if the call was close, right? And it's a bit like that in meetings sometimes, right? You can start out sort of soft, sometimes you just have to get a little bit loud. And I also found that you really do just have to start frequently, especially in those environments, with a very generous statement about what a good meeting it is, how important somebody else said, or something, in order to sort of get the attention to get to the point that you want to get to. My successes were viewed, of course, by some as you got that job or that responsibility because you're a woman, but I knew it wasn't true. And I knew how hard I worked to get the job, and I knew how the interviews went, and so I just had to. That was my confidence to sort of say, well, I don't think so, but we'll see. And I would say overall, though, through the course of my career, my supporters were much more ardent than my detractors. And they knew me a lot better. So the people who really knew me were very, very strong supporters. And these issues, worked out over time. I remember I got a job once, and I did an all-hands meeting. It was about 1,000 people. And I was walking out. It was a group that I didn't know that well. And I was walking out, and I heard one of the people overheard a conversation. And the conversation was, well, she doesn't seem completely clueless. I was like, yes! That's sometimes what it's like. And but I have to say that over time, I am very, very grateful to have learned to be generous and tolerant, and to have been given the opportunities. I used to really resent how much nicer I had to be than everybody else. But in fact, over time, I decided if the world was full of people who learned to be generous and tolerant, it would be a pretty nice place to live. So if I could, if I learned that and I could do that, then I was just grateful for it. And finally, obviously, all of you that are thinking about jobs are also thinking about life and work-life balance, and it does matter. And what I would say, especially to the women, but also to the men in today's world, work-life balance won't be easy, but it will be exciting, and you control it. And I have the benefit of having two wonderful adult daughters who are around 30. Raising them, I called balance as an equal state of chaos. And it was actually true when work got a little bit, like I didn't feel like, I thought things were a little bit too chaotic, I'd spend more time at work, and when the kids seemed like they needed more attention and then home got really chaotic, I would just spend more time there, and it was all about balancing the chaos. I didn't mind that. There was a lot of good things about it, but to believe everything's going to be calm and kind of working all the time, that just wasn't my life. I didn't feel comfortable when I was, especially in the early part of my career, talking about raising kids at work. I did it sort of silently. I took care of the problems, and I didn't talk about it. Over time, I learned to talk about it more, and what I found is that my employees were grateful. Like, oh, you're a person too, you had to deal with that too, and as a result, the work environment was just a lot better. And I would just say my life has always been full and in a wonderful way. I have a list of things. Everybody always ask me, what am I doing now? So I have a list of things I'm doing now. I haven't been bored. I'm on a lot of review panels at universities and elsewhere. And finally on Monday, I'm starting this, so it's actually kind of funny. I'm starting this Sam Nunn Distinguished Fellowship at an organization in DC called Nuclear Threat Initiative. The reason this is sort of funny is this is the inaugural position. Sam Nunn was a senator very involved in nuclear nonproliferation, which is a pretty important topic right now in our world. And it's funny because the Jruby first fellowships in the same week are kicking off. And so I'm going to go start a distinguished fellowship, and the fellowships that were named after me are starting, but I'm really looking forward to it. And then finally, just because you guys ought to be very, very proud to be engineers, I am. It's a much nobler profession than commonly recognized. I think engineering is often considered a little bit nerdy and not always in a positive way. But many people go into engineering believing that it's a practical career choice, and their families might think that as well. But engineers are more than just practical. They have the skills needed to make the world a better place. Engineers solve problems. And without engineers, breakthroughs in science may not be as useful. And we build things every day. And you ought to be proud that you're part of that and work hard to be a good engineer. And there are many national and international problems that require public service engineering. So the labs are one way that you do public service engineering. There are other ways. And there are many great career choices, but I just wanted to introduce you to this one. And so again, I implore you to think big about what you're going to do and how you're going to make a difference. Thank you. A few minutes for questions and answers, I think, if there are any. It's getting kind of late. Who was number one? I don't remember. No, it was a person at Intel, I think. It was a high-level manager at Intel. It's a person I don't know. I would love to meet, actually. They should have like a party for these people, but I was just joking about being number one, by the way. I thought it was really cool to be number two.
Something that I'm wondering from a national security perspective, I feel we don't talk enough about climate change and how it's a threat. And I don't feel very optimistic, to be honest with you. And so I wanted to know from you, since you were inside the Department of Energy, what you think we're doing, do you think it's enough, and how we can reverse that?
Yeah, it's a great question. Climate change is actually quite concerning. I completely agree, and I think it is hard to talk about at the moment. And I think I have a lot of concerns about how the discussion is being squashed. I also had a lot of concerns during the Obama administration how it was being overhyped by people who, unfortunately, from my perspective, in some cases, I think scientists were, crying pretty hard so they could get a lot of money for research in the area. That also sort of started the cycle of, you're either for it or against it. And, you shouldn't be for or against science or environment or climate change. It should be an honest discussion. And unfortunately, it hasn't been that. And at the moment, I think there are climate scientists continuing to work, but they often call it something different. And it is concerning. Fortunately, there's this very good report that just came out a few weeks ago. So there are people continuing to work, but unfortunately, yeah, the political climate is bad for that right now. That's something that as engineers, I think you're pretty likely to be involved in, right? Especially if you do research and development or work for the government. Yeah. I hope you're involved. Yep. Please.
Did you find any particular techniques helpful that you could maybe suggest to help keep your costs and budgets under control as you were working on various research projects?
Yeah, that's a great question. This is a real engineering. In fact, in the real world in engineering, you lay out a plan and then you cut the cost by 10%, and then you cut it by another 10%. Then you do it faster, and it's the kind of the way the world works. And I think. Actually, I found that one of the greatest things about engineering. You always had to come up with a new creative solution, like how are we going to do that, right? When to control cost and time for delivery. And earlier today, I was on the Mechanical Engineering Advisory Council at Purdue West Lafayette, and we actually suggested for the senior design projects that, like 8 weeks in, they say, okay, now you have to cut the cost 20%. And another, just before the final thing, say, and oh, by the way, you have to add, because it's the real world. If you want to do a design project, that's the way it really works. So you do have to, and that's when the teams really come together. And I don't know that I had any tools other than creativity and trying to work with the whole team to make it happen. There are lots of tools, and you probably have better ideas than I do. So, that's a good question. Yes?
I was wondering if you could talk more about the inclusive
environment. When science and engineering is the highest calling, if you're a good scientist or engineer, you're kind of in the club, right? That's the positive part. The negative part is that it takes a very long time and a very concerted effort for cultures to change at institutions, and the national laboratories were largely physics institutions, and it was very, male and alpha male sort of oriented. And I would say that the fact that I was appointed lab director was because of 30 years of really, really hard work at Sandia National Laboratories to try to change the culture. And some of the other laboratories are kind of in the same place, and others are earlier in that journey. but the good thing is you can get in you can get in with good, solid engineering skills, and being a little loud and very generous. Okay, well, thank you very much.